Hello there. I am Kios, the Ronin Beatmaker. And welcome to Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. And if you are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button and ring the notification bell and leave a comment with your thoughts below. And on this episode, we're going to discuss the legend of Pastor John. Now, since it's Black History Month, throughout this time, I will be doing the occasional live stream on some interesting historical individuals, some that are a bit conflicting to the actual narrative, or I should say the mainstream narrative, whether it's Hannibal of Carthage, which we will be covering in a later date. So strap yourselves in. We're going to be uncovering some true aspects of our history. As we discussed on our previous episode on the Princess Anne, history is a psyop. So, without further ado, let us get into it. The legend of Prester John and his lost kingdom in the East. All right. Prester John, also known as Presbyter John or John the Elder, was a legendary figure in Europe during the medieval and early modern periods. Europeans living at that time believed that Prester John was a wealthy and powerful Christian monarch who ruled over a kingdom somewhere in the East, beyond the borders of medieval Christendom. This kingdom was thought to be lost among the nation of the Muslims and pagans, though no one knew its exact location. Nevertheless, the Europeans were extremely keen on making contact with this legendary ruler, as they were hoping to find a powerful Christian ally in the East in their struggle against the Muslims. Although Prester John's kingdom was never found, its legend contributed to Portuguese exploration during the Age of Discovery. Thus, indirectly, this fabled ruler had a big impact on world history. What is the legend of Prester John? The legend of Prester John first arose during the 12th century. This was the time of the Crusades, when Christians from the Europe attempted to seize the Holy Land from the Muslims by force. The earliest known reference to the legend of Prester John dates back to 1145. It's important to note that the previous year, the county of Edessa, the northernmost Crusader state, was captured by Zengi, the Seljuk governor of Mosul. The loss of Edessa sent shockwaves across Europe, leading to the Second Crusade in 1147. In any case, the legend of Prester John was first reported in Bishop Otto's of Freising's Chronicon, a year after the fall of Edessa. Otto claims that he heard this story from Bishop Hugh of Jabala in Syria, who told it to the papal court in Viterbo. Otto's account of Prester John is as follows. Quote, he said, indeed, that not many years since, one John, a king and priest living in the Far East, beyond Persia and Armenia, and who, with his people, is a Christian but not a Nestorian, had warned upon the so-called Samariads, the brother kings of Medes and Persians. John also attacked Ecbatana, the capital of their kingdom. When the aforesaid kings advanced against him with a force of Persians, Medes, Assyrians, a 3-day struggle ensued. Since both sides were willing to die rather than to flee, at length, Prester John, so he is usually called, put the Persians to fight and emerged from the dreadful slaughter as victor. End quote. They claim that this is more than a legend or a myth. But they said that about the Trojan War. Next thing you know, they find a piece of the wall. Now, there's a book I was recently made aware of. I was listening to a light lecture on Hannibal, and he brought up a very interesting book. Now, I'm prefacing this because of a later image that's going to appear in regards to Prester John. Now, there's a book I highly recommend people out there that I plan on getting. And it's called Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe. So I would like you guys to just keep that in mind as we continue to move forward. Here we have an illustration depicting Prester John, or Prester John as depicted in the Chronicles of Hartmann, Schiedel, 1493. He goes on to say that Prester John tried to bring his army to aid Jerusalem, but was unable to do so. Quote, the bishop said that the aforesaid John moved his army to aid the Church of Jerusalem, but that when he came to the Tigris and was unable to take his army across it by any means, he turned aside to the north, where he had been informed that the stream was frozen solid during the winter. There he awaited the ice for several years, but saw none because of the temperature weather. His army lost many men on account of the weather to which they were unaccustomed, and he was compelled to return home. Lastly, Otto provides some information about Prester John's lineage and his qualities as a ruler. He is said to be descendant of Magi of old, who are mentioned in the Gospel. He governs the same people as they did, and is said to enjoy such glory and such plenty that he uses no scepter save one of emerald. Fired by the example of his forefathers, who came to adore Christ in the manger, he proposed to go to Jerusalem, but he was, they say, turned back for the aforementioned reason. Here we have an image depicting Prester John from the 1800s, El Preste Juan. Now, the reason why I said to keep in mind the book, Black Star, Africans in Early Europe, is because we are talking about early Europe. Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there that would like to downplay the true influences that Africans had on history, on sciences, religions, everything. Now, this is not me coming from some sort of black supremacist mindset or anything like that. This is me coming from, looking at it from a historical standpoint. We have to take in consideration, when it comes to Christianity, why is it the most oldest, Bible and most accurate one is in Ethiopia? Why is it that when it comes to the Black Madonna, in which that book talks about and shows countless statues throughout Europe of black figures? So, the history is constantly being memory holed and is being manipulated and obfuscated and turned into a psyop to propagandize the masses into believing and worshiping one race or another, or denigrating one race or another, or not valuing their true history and heritage and culture, whatever it may be. And I'm not trying to, like I said earlier, sound very inflammatory, but we need to speak realistically, because I deal in the essential reality. And in the essential reality, your feelings aren't necessarily going to aid in your development into your self-actualized individual. Oftentimes our feelings are attached, our feelings are, associated with our attachments. And, when you are part of a domestication system that re-educates you to, in many ways, hate your own heritage and culture, and believe another history other than your own, you can see how that can have drastic impacts on an individual, a society, a community, a nation. And so that's why when I'm talking about these things and, future presentations and live streams this month, as I like to say, I like to challenge people's foundational belief systems, because that's the only way we can grow and improve as individuals. If we are denying our ability to challenge ourselves. How are we ever going to improve on ourselves? How are we ever going to improve our community, our society? So I implore everyone to, black, white, Asian, whatever it may be, take a look into these books, especially this book that I recommended. And don't worry, we'll eventually cover, the origins of the Chinese people and how they used to be black skinned, but slow and steady wins the race. But let's continue. Enough of a Ronin rant. According to one interpretation of the text, the battle mentioned by Hugh may have been the Battle of Kotwan, which was fought to the north of Samarkand in 1141. During the battle, the Seljuks were defeated by Yul Dashi, the founder of Quera Kitai. Since the dynasty's rulers adopted the title Gur Khan or Kor Khan, it has been suggested that this title may have been changed phonetically in Hebrew to Yohanan or Syriac to Yohanan, ultimately resulting in Joannes, Latin for John. Although Yuli Dashi was himself a Buddhist, many of the Querakai elite were Nestorians, thus fitting Hugh's description. If this interpretation were correct, it would mean that the legend of Prester John did have some historical basis. The Letter of Prester John was a medieval bestseller. During the 13th century, a monk and chronicler, Albert of Tros Fetanius, recorded that in 1165, a letter allegedly from Prester John was sent to several Christian rulers, most notably Manuel I Comnenus, the Byzantine Emperor, and Frederick I Barbaros, the Holy Roman Emperor. Check out the last week's live stream on his daughter, which we covered. These were the two most powerful secular rulers of Christendom at that time. Although the letter of Prester John is today generally believed to be a hoax, the Christians of medieval Europe may have been convinced of its authenticity. The Pope, Alexander III, for instance, even sent a reply to Prester John through his physician, Philip, on September 27, 1177. Philip vanishes from history after that, as he probably did not succeed in his mission. Additionally, the letter of Prester John was a bestseller during the Middle Ages, and over 100 versions of this letter were published in the centuries after its first appearance. And here we have a picture of the letter by Prester John from the Walters Art Museum. The letter of Prester John is a much longer piece of text compared to Otto's account of Prester John, and it is a considerable elaboration of the legend. For instance, Otto describes neither the power of Prester John nor the extent of his kingdom. These details, however, are found in the letter of Prester John. In one version of the text, for instance, Prester John claims to have 72 kings as his vassals, most of whom are not Christians. As for the extent of his kingdom, it is described as follows. And our land stretches from the extremities of India, where the body of Thomas the apostle rests, and it extends through the wilderness to the setting sun, and reaches back, sloping to deserted Babylon, near the Tower of Babylon. These details were no doubt meant to portray Prester John as a powerful ruler, which is the chief purpose of the letter. Other details in the letter that serve this purpose include a list and description of the exotic flora and fauna in Prester John's kingdom and some of the peoples under his rule. For example, the letter speaks of a herb that drives evil spirits away, worms that can live only in fire, and people who can live underwater for 3 or 4 months. The letter also describes the wealth of Prester John as well as the might of his army. Now, okay, I'll say what I'm going to say after this. Okay, quote: Our men have abundance of all kinds of riches. We liken none of the face of the earth to us in riches. When we go to war in force against our enemies, we let carry before us 15 large, magnificent crosses made of gold and silver, with precious stones therein, one in each car, instead of standards, and behind each of them 12,000 men of arms, and 100,000 foot soldiers, without counting the 5,000 who have to do with the bearing food and drink. End quote. Okay, so the other day I was listening to the Higher Side Chats. Shout out to Greg Carlwood, and he had a research on I apologize that I cannot remember his name at the moment. Where is it? Hold on a second, guys. I want to get the name for you guys in case you want to listen to it. Already. It is called let me just go here so I don't have to deal with that. It's called Analog. Wait, nope. Hold on. Which one is it called? Okay, here we go. It's Michael Wan. Burnt Offerings, Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and... Wait, no, that's not it. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. It's Analog. The Accidental Awakening, Anomalous America, and Pyramid Bunkers. With Analog, aka Ben. So I was listening to that, and he said some very compelling things. For instance, he was talking about how in his research and studies, he has, well, he firmly believes that we all originate from a dark skin race. And I'm not here to now I know because it's Black History Month, and it was like we was all black, and it's like no, it's not. That's not what I'm trying to infer here necessarily. But what he was essentially saying in his research, that the planet's topography and environment was completely different, and at that time everyone was of dark skinned. And over time there became lighter variants of different races of humans. But one thing that he was really inferring on was this whole idea that, like, he was talking about in these old newspaper articles from the early 1800s 1900s in North America, of these entire underground cities and caverns and murals that are for these giants. He talked about one farmer who found this entire underground funeral site for this 9-foot giant, and inside his burial they found a book that was made of thin gold tablets, very similar to actually the exact similar design to the Mormons' golden book. So he was essentially saying, they're talking about, the articles in which there are descriptions of Egyptian artifacts here in North America. I believe it was Herodotus who was getting some education from the priests in Egypt, and they were explaining how they used to travel to North America. Um, so, essentially, what I'm trying to bring to everyone's attention is that even when it comes to the Phoenicians, who were dark skinned, as in the Hannibal book, they were described as dark. They were described as dark Negroids. And you have these, or you look at the Moors, and the Phoenicians were incredible individuals. We'll be covering them as well. But the point that I'm making here is that some things they say are myth and some things they say are legend, but then the next thing you know, the further you do your own research, the further you look into archaeological research, historical manuscripts, whatever it may be, these things become more realistic. And essentially what Analog was talking about was like, when you have these underground cities in North America and you have these massive pyramids that are underground in North America, whether it's the pyramids in Alaska, whether it's all the pyramids riddling Florida or West Virginia. And we covered, if you're interested in learning about the giants in North America, I have multiple episodes that you can check out. So the point that I'm making here in relating to what Analog was talking about is that we really don't know the true history of anything. And we have to do our own personal research to do that. And when I was listening to that lecture about Hannibal and he brought up that book, it made me think about a lot of these weird images I saw of the Black Madonna, or Christ's mother, and how you'd have these these statues of Mary. Yeah, no, was it Mary? Yeah, Mary, but not Mary Magdalene. Mary, OG Mary, and she's black, and Christ is black. And then you further look into the stories about Buddha and Christ, and how Christ is really a reincarnation of Buddha, but that's a whole nother story, and I'm not going to go into that right now. But the point that I'm making here is, for everyone, is like, they may call these legends and myths, but most of the time I believe that's to obfuscate and to elude us from the actual truth. And that's just my personal opinion on it. Enough of a Ronin rant. Let us get back into it. Oh, hold on a second. Little hiccup. But I'll keep on going with my rant until I get this fixed. Just the point that I'm saying here, guys, is like, we really don't understand everything. And, I'm not here to... I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to inflame people. I know some of this stuff is going to be, very reactionary, and some people are going to, be offended by some of the things that I'm saying and I'm covering. And that's okay. You have every right to. But I really recommend that you take some time and do your own research into these things and not take everything that I say verbatim, because I'm still learning myself. Alrighty. Okay, here we go. Nowadays, anytime I see the account associated, the video, it tells me maybe they were saying some stuff that was too deep, too truthful, and it got their video taken down, which is a bummer. But all right, here we go. While the real author of the letter of Prester, John, may never be known, it has been speculated that he or she was a Westerner who was probably familiar with two much older books, the Alexander Romance and the Acts of Thomas. The former, though, based on the life of Alexander the Great, contained numerous fantastical elements, whereas the latter speaks of St. Thomas' mission to spread Christianity in India. The Acts of Thomas could have been the inspiration behind the possibility of a Christian ruler in the East, and the Alexander Romance provides details for the marvelous flora, fauna, and peoples in the Eastern Kingdom. The letter of Prester John may have been merely a piece of medieval travel literature, though the original purpose of its composition and how its readers received it is unclear. Apart from the Pope's mission to Prester John, it seems that other Christian rulers did not really bother themselves with the legend. It's so much of a legend, then why do we have this illustration of Prester Juan? And if we were to look into the illustrator who drew this and where he got his depictions of Prester John, then you gotta start asking questions. That's all I'm saying, guys. That's all I'm saying. Okay. A surprising King David of India. During the 13th century, however, the legend of Prester John gained popularity once again. In 1221, the Fifth Crusade, which aimed to recapture Jerusalem and the Holy Land by seizing Cairo, the Ayyubid capital, ended in failure. When the Bishop of Ars, Jacques de Vitry, returned to Europe several years later, he brought with him a piece of good news: a King David of India, apparently the son of or grandson of Prester John, had subdued the Muslim Khazarian Empire, which ruled over Persia at that time. Moreover, this King David was summoned to be marching against the other Muslim powers. Thus, the Christians of Europe were hopeful that they would be able to defeat the Muslims with the aid of this Christian monarch from the East. The rumors of this King David were not entirely false, nor were they entirely true. While King David was a king from the East, he was not a Christian. In fact, the Europeans soon learned that he was Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire. Sorry guys, having a little bit of a hiccup. Okay. So here we have a illustration of Genghis Khan, proclaimed Khagan of the Mongols. Illustration from the 15th century Jami al-Taraki manuscript. Here we go. The connection between Genghis Khan and Prester John was also elaborated on by Christian writers during that time. The relation between the two figures varied from one author to another. In one version of the tale, for instance, Genghis Khan had been a vassal of Prester John, rebelled against him, and defeated him. In another, Prester John was identified as Tugrul, Genghis Khan's foster father. In any case, it is clear that Prester John was no longer seen as the invincible Christian king of the earlier tales, but a human monarch, though mighty, who had been defeated by the Mongols. Initially, the Europeans tried to form alliances with the Mongols and hoped that their conversion to Christianity would help them turn the tide against Islam. However, the excessive brutality displayed by the Mongols during their conquests, as well as the fact that some of them converted to Islam, brought an end to the Europeans' hopes. Man, that would have been great to have seen. I don't know, there's this great show called Marco Polo on Netflix. Sadly got canceled. But second season ended with the arrival of the Christian armies in Mongol territory. Oh man. That would have been great. Let's continue. Where was the kingdom of Prester John? Furthermore, during the 14th century, the Mongol Empire itself was disintegrating. As a consequence, the search for Prester John shifted from Central Asia to Africa, more specifically to Abyssinia, an area which covers modern Ethiopia and Eritrea. This may be strange, as Prester John is said to be a king of India, which would mean that he came from somewhere in Asia rather than Africa. The medieval Europeans, however, have a different view of India from us, and the Abyssinian is sometimes considered part of it. I think they're thinking of the Middle East. Here we have a map of Africa by Abraham Ortelius, 1527 to 1598. Latin title in box. Oh, good Lord, I'm good on that. Hey! All right. The Europeans were aware that there were Christians in Abyssinia following the Islamic conquest during the 7th century AD. However, contact between the two areas was severed. Around the time when the Europeans no longer believed that Central Asia was the land of Prester John, contact between Europe and Abyssinia was reestablished. During the 14th century, Abyssinian emissaries had reached the courts of Europe, while Dominican missionaries made it as far as Central Africa. Thus, by the end of the century, it was commonly agreed in Europe that Prester John was a ruler of Abyssinia. In one version of the legend, Prester John is said to have retired to Abyssinia after he was defeated by Genghis Khan, thus making a connection between the stories from the 14th and the 13th centuries. The hope that Prester John would be a formidable ally to the Christians against their Muslim enemies continued during the 14th century and beyond. For instance, it was thought that he could have diverted or blocked the Nile, thereby starving the Muslims in Egypt into submission. This, however, was not done, with some arguing that Prester John, being a benevolent ruler, was reluctant to starve the Christians living along the Nile as well. Others, however, claimed that Prester John had been paid off by the Muslims. The fabled king's impact on the Age of Exploration. During the Age of Exploration, which began during the 15th century, one of the factors motivating the Portuguese explorers was the legend of Prester John. They were still hoping to find the kingdom of this legendary ruler and to form an alliance with him, his descendants, against the Muslims. Although the Portuguese never found Prester John, they did find a sea route to Asia, thereby ushering a new era in world history. And here we have Prester John on the Indies, close up from a Praetorian chart from the late 16th century. The Boledian libraries. Okay, sorry. It's being a little buggy today. All right. Almost there. Okay. Today, it is generally accepted that Prester John was a legendary figure who did not exist, or at least was based partly on actual historical personages. Nevertheless, it is undeniable that Prester John and his legend had a huge impact on the people of medieval Europe. Moreover, by motivating the Portuguese during the Age of Exploration, the legend of Prester John exerted an influence on world history as well. Finally, Prester John was a literary icon. Apart from the medieval texts mentioned earlier, he also appears in other more modern works of literature, including William Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing and Umberto Eco's Bundolino. Finney. And this article was written by, because I forgot to say that at the beginning, by Wu Mingren. And there you have it. The legend of Prester John. Tune in later on into this week and in the rest of the month as we cover other various historical mysteries and legends of Black and African history. If you have made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Much love to the Rumble viewers, YouTube viewers, Twitch, and Twitter. Thank you guys all for tuning in, and have a great rest of your weekend. And I will see you guys next week. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.